Hey there, Paul David Thompson coming at you on the question about what is subject to the existing mortgage. So I get this a lot. People come to me and say, I don't really understand how to do sub twos and when should I do them and why would anybody buy or sell me their property subject to in the first place. So let's just dig right into it. So simply stated, when someone says that I'm going to buy a property, air quote, subject to, it is simply a statement that says, I'm going to buy something with the exception to title. In the context of real estate investing, subject to says, I'm going to buy that property subject to the existing mortgage. So a more generic example is when you buy a property and there's an easement on the property so that the utility company can come through and do some sort of maintenance. That's a normal lien or encumbrance on the property. So that property is transferred subject to the existing encumbrance. It doesn't really affect the value of the property. In fact, if anything, it does it a good service because now you have access to cleaning up the utility poles or whatever. That's a very common transaction, and it's not something that you're probably even aware of when you buy a property when it's subject to that kind of normal encumbrance. However, as an investor, you can help somebody who needs to sell their property, but they don't have the means to sell it. They owe too much on it. The property needs some work. What you're doing is you're buying it subject to the underlying mortgage. They owe a mortgage on the property, and you're saying, you know what, I'll buy it from you, but we're going to leave that mortgage in place, and I'm going to agree to buy it for you, or to buy it, and I'm going to make those payments for you going forward. So what does that mean in practice? Well, it isn't a common transaction because the seller, when they do that, they are putting quite a bit of faith in you as the buyer of the property to actually fulfill your obligation to what you've agreed to do, which is to make their payments. So you might ask the question, well, why would anybody sell their house but yet not satisfy the mortgage, leave that mortgage in place, and then let some other person buy it from them or make those payments and just trust that they're going to do it? It's a good question. And the average seller probably wouldn't go ahead and do that because they're not in a pinch. They're not in some sort of an issue. They're not facing foreclosure. But in certain circumstances, there are sellers who are facing foreclosure or bankruptcy that they just simply can't get out. They can't sell their property. They owe too much on it. It needs a lot of work. And how else are you going to solve that problem unless you sell it somehow so that an investor can come in and fix it for them? And that's what, as an investor, you can sometimes offer to do. Now, it doesn't mean that just because somebody will sell you a property subject to their existing mortgage does not mean that you should. It needs to be a scenario where it actually makes sense for you, the investor, and it makes sense for the seller. So the common way to do this is, let's just give an example. Let's say the property is worth, say, $150,000, and the the seller owes $135,000 on the property. And it's in decent shape, but it just needs a little bit of work. Maybe, it's maybe $5,000 worth of work. So, but say the seller, in this case, they don't have the $5K. They're about to face foreclosure, and let's say this payment is, let's say their payment is $650 per month for principal and interest only. It does not include taxes and insurance. So they owe $650 on the property per month, and they owe $135, and they got it, say, 5 years ago. So they're 5 years into their 30-year note. So as an investor, that's something I might consider, because this is a property that might, say, rent for $1,500 a month. Is that a deal that you would do? If you could take on somebody else's mortgage for $650 a month, and you could put an extra $5,000 into it and make rent the property for $1,500, and you had about $10,000 of equity in the property. Is that a deal that you might do as an investor? It might be. Now, why would the seller do this? The seller's going to do this potentially because they're in a pinch. They can't afford that $650. They're about to get behind on those payments. They can't afford to put the $5,000 in there. maybe they had a job transfer, maybe there's been a death in the family, and speed of the transaction is more important to them than it is for them to try and make the most out of their property. And even if they were to try and sell this property and list it for $150,000, they would net probably, they would break even at best. And if they don't have the $5,000 to put into the property, then it's kind of a losing proposition to them. And say they're about to move, say their father died, and they're about to move into their father's house. This has happened to me before, where the seller, they're about to move into a free and cleared property that they just inherited, that they preferred to live in, but they needed to sell this property, similar numbers, and they didn't have the cash for it. But they were house rich, but they were cash poor. Well, I'll come in and say, well, it's not going to hurt you if I just make your payments for you. I'll keep establishing your credit by making those payments. And if for any reason I don't make a payment, then this property reverts back to you. That's what you can do when you're buying subject to the existing mortgage. And what you'll hear sometimes is people refer to this as sub 2 or sub 2 investing. So that's something that's just kind of like shorthand nomenclature that people refer to this overall technique. And this is sometimes an offer that I will give to somebody if it makes sense for them. And if it doesn't, no harm, no foul. It just, that doesn't make sense. You don't want to leave the mortgage in place. I understand. It's not something I would naturally want to do myself. So it's got to be a situation where it makes sense for the seller. Now, here's the really, really important thing. This is often touted as a way to get into the property without a lot of money. And it's true. In the example that I just gave, you would only need $5,000 to fix the property up. And let's say maybe, we'll call it $2,000 in transaction cost. We'll call this fix up and transaction cost, closing cost, taxes, etc. The normal kind of things that you would do when you buy a property. Well, that can be a problem because, say, what if you only had $7,500 to your name to go invest, and so you're gonna pay $5,000 to fix the property up. You're gonna pay $2,000 in closing costs and transaction costs to actually get the title of the property, and then that leaves you a total of $7,000 that you put into it, and you're left to $500 to your name. That's all you had to begin with, and you got to make a $650 payment right away. So you're stretching already. Now let's just say you find a way to stretch this, and actually you're able to make the $650 payment, and you get a renter in there to pay you $1,500, and so you're starting to make a little bit of money on the deal. But you still got to pay taxes and insurance on the property. And what happens if there's some sort of big repair that happens? So be careful buying a property with zero or no money down techniques, which I'm all about if you can pull it off. But if you're not in a position of financial strength or power and you're stretching your budget, this person has just put a lot of faith in you to make their mortgage payments for them. And if you don't, you're messing up their credit and you've ruined your reputation and their trust in you. So it's really important to not get into these transactions just because you can. Now, there's another concern, which is legitimate, that you want to think about when you're buying a property subject to the existing mortgage. So this important detail is this existing mortgage part. Well, what is in a mortgage? There's a lot of documentation when you sign a mortgage that you may not be aware of. Well, one of those is called the due on sale clause. Due on sale clause. And what does that mean? It's another word for I'm losing the idea here. Acceleration. It's another word for acceleration clause. You can hear it referred to as either one of those. So what's really important there is same idea. What happens when there's a due on sale clause and you accelerate, and the lender, the bank, chooses to accelerate the note? What does that do? Well, when title transfers and the underlying mortgage bank detects that that's happened, they have the right to accelerate and make that entire loan due like that. So in the case we had, there was a balance of $135,000. Well, if they detect it and if they care, the bank has the legal right to say that is due right now. Right now. And if you don't have a solution for that, then you're exposed. So you want to buy a property like this knowing that that risk is out there. Now, it doesn't happen a lot, but it has happened. I know a bank in my town that they go out actively looking for this, and they call those kind of loans due. It typically, if you're making payments, the bank doesn't care. But as of this recording, right now, interest rates are on the rise. So maybe when that loan was due or was created, the prevailing interest rate of the time was 4.25%. So you had I'm making that up, I don't really know. That's kind of the ballpark probably when that 5 years ago when that loan was made. For a 30-year fixed loan, that's probably about the same ballpark. Well, the prevailing interest rate now is 5, maybe even 6%, depending on your credit score. And there's some indication that there's a trend for that to go up over time. The Fed is going to be raising interest rates to kind of try and get us out of this really low state of interest. So, what if you were a bank and you see the idea that you could be charging 6, 7, maybe even 8% interest in the near term, but yet you have all these loans out here that are 4.25%, what might you think to do? Might you go and find some of those deals that have been transacted and call the loans due because you have the right to? So on title, so in the county records, this is how they detect it. On title, you'll have the seller name, so we'll call it Mr. Seller. They own the property, and the bank was the lender to this seller when they bought the property. And so they sold the property to you, and there's a transfer to, let's just say, Buyer LLC. Oops. Buyer LLC. That's you. That's your LLC that you have now taken title to. Well, this is on public record, so they know that you've transacted that. So if you can't really hide when you go and put it into your LLC, and you're making payments from your LLC, and this is on public record, a quick title search, a quick public record search will let the bank know that something's happened, and they could find that 5 years ago and call it right now. So beware of that. It isn't common. It hasn't happened a lot, but there's a potential that it could happen. So what are some mitigating factors? What might you do? Well, one way is to transfer that into a trust called, we'll call it Main Street Trust. Main Street Trust. And this is what we refer to as a land trust. But the word land does not have to exist inside of this trust name. So what you do is, as a buyer, you transfer it over here and you make this seller the trustee. So Mr. Seller is the trustee, or actually you make the Mr. Seller the beneficiary. And then you have a third party, like your spouse or a good buddy of yours. We'll call him Buddy. Buddy acts as the trustee. Now Buddy has title. So on the public record, this would show up as 123 Main Street Trust. Buddy Smith, we'll say. Buddy Smith as trustee. And this long line right here is what would show up as the trust name on the public record. So you would see this transfer from Mr. Seller to this trust, and the right, Mr. Seller has the right to transfer their property into a trust. And so long as they stay as the beneficiary, They are not triggering the due on sale clause. And that's what happens in public record. Now, if you want to, then you can transfer this beneficial interest in this trust to your LLC. And when that happens, that is actually a private transaction that is not happening on the public record. And when you do that, you are absolutely triggering the due on sale clause. However, it doesn't appear as though you did, because this looks like the seller just put it into like a living trust, which is not uncommon for people to do, to transfer property into a trust for estate planning purposes. Well then, quietly, behind the scenes, you can do a transfer of ownership from Mr. Seller to the LLC. It's called an assignment of beneficial interest. And I have a little more discussion about this in my land trust video, which I'll put up here. And when you do that, then you have the right, or you have the ability to run this property as though you own it, because you now do. You have the beneficial interest and you effectively own it, you control it. But this, your trusted trustee, your buddy, whoever your buddy is, now technically owns title. Excuse me, technically owns title, and now you have set up a scenario where it's not real obvious to the bank that you have done this transaction. Could they still catch you? Could they still call it due if they detected it? Absolutely. It just obfuscates it a little bit. And this idea of catching you, this is not illegal to transfer the property using the subject to the existing mortgage. But there is an underlying risk. If the bank detects it and they care, they could call it due on sale, and you're obligated to do that. So recognize the risks. This is Paul David Thompson. If you have any more questions about or comments about this topic, ask them down here. I'll do subsequent videos. Also, I have a podcast called Ready Investor One. I'm looking forward to hearing more from you. Hey, if you enjoyed the video, make sure and give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you can watch future videos, and make sure and hit the notification button so you can get notified when new videos are posted. And right now, I have additional videos for you right here.